Hallo und herzlich willkommen auf der Webinale 2013. Mein Name ist Corinna Kern, ich bin Redakteurin bei PHP Magazin und bei webmagazin.de. I'm going to switch to English now since my interview partner today is Patrick Lauke, Accessibility Consultant at the Paciello Group. Hi Patrick.
Hello.
Let's talk about getting touchy. If I have a website and want to make sure that it works on touch devices, what should I do?
Well, the short answer is if your website is not doing anything special, if it's just a simple website, maybe you have a little bit of JavaScript to do certain effects on the page, certain buttons that activate something, you actually don't have to do almost anything, or sometimes in the best case, nothing at all, because browsers on mobile devices or tablets, the traditional browsers that are on touch devices, are actually built to use the web as it is today. And because the web of today is still filled with a lot of these types of websites that use even bad practices like scripts that fire on mouse over, for instance, because the web has a lot of that content, these browsers actually emulate these specific mouse events. So in the best case, you don't have to do anything at all. But there might be other problems. There might be certain situations where you want to do something very interactive, or there might be situations like having drop-down menus that only happen on hover. That sort of interaction isn't well supported on touch devices. And at that point, yes, there are a new class of events that you'd want to use called touch events, which were invented by Apple, introduced with iOS Safari. Now all the other browsers, with one exception, have adopted them as well. So you get them in Firefox on Android, for instance, or Chrome on a touch-enabled laptop. The one exception is Microsoft with IE10 have introduced a whole new class of events called pointer events, which kind of merge the two concepts together of is it a mouse, is it a touch. They basically build a framework around this particular idea, because as a developer I don't necessarily need to know if the user used a finger or a mouse. All I want to know is there was a certain kind of interaction. But once you start using those events, you can really take advantage of the various interactivities that the touch events, the touch screens offer, things like swiping, things like multi-touch extensions, etc.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us a short practical example on how to use touch events in what use case?
One of the classic examples really is that if you don't do anything at all and just rely on the browsers firing the simulated mouse events, you'll notice that if your scripts, for instance, are listening on the click handler of, say, a button to fire a certain type of interaction, you'll notice that on a touchscreen device, as you're releasing the finger from the touch device, there is a delay of about 350 milliseconds before the event is actually being fired. Now that's because these touch devices, the finger itself, the finger touch, is actually overloaded. It doesn't just serve one purpose. It's not just there to say I want to activate something, but users use the finger as well, a simple tap to maybe start a double tap on a device, or there might be a second finger that comes on the screen to start a gesture or to do scrolling, etc. So the browsers on these touch devices are really there waiting to see, is something more happening, or was this an actual touch, an actual kind of activation event, if you will. After that 300 millisecond delay, they're fairly sure that nothing else is going to happen, and they fire the click event. Now, on a regular website, 300 milliseconds are noticeable, but most users, I've never heard anybody complain about that kind of thing. But as we're trying to now start to build more kind of native application-like web applications that mimic some of the interactions that you get on native apps, that delay becomes quite noticeable, and it does feel very sluggish. You're pressing a button, and that 300 milliseconds really kind of makes you wonder, why is this application running so slow? So there are techniques that involve touch events that allow you to overcome that 300 millisecond delay. One of the classic approaches that I've seen far too many times and it's unfortunate because it's slightly problematic, is to do a feature detect at the start to say, does the browser support touch? And if so, instead of listening to the click event, instead of hooking my scripts into click, I can fire them right away on touch start or touch end, for instance. Now that approach works in most cases, and it's kind of a tried and tested approach for the last few years. However, it makes an assumption that a browser that supports touch is on a device that is exclusively a touch device. That held true on when the landscape only included iPhones and Android phones and tablets. But there's now a whole new class of devices on the market. Windows 8 laptops are, there's hundreds of different models. Even on the lower end of the scale, the very cheap ones already come now with touch screens. I mean, that's one of the big features of Windows 8 is the whole interactivity. You can use a touch screen, you can use the keyboard, you can use the mouse or a trackpad. And really what we're seeing now is users actually switching between different input modes, even while they're filling out a form on a website, for instance, or just following through a single action during a single visit on a website. So making the assumption that if it's a touch device, users will only use touch, and therefore I will only listen to touch, is a problem, because by doing that you automatically cut out users that, yes, are on a device that's capable of touch, but are actually using a mouse or a trackpad or even a keyboard. And there are other devices, more kind of hybrid devices like Android-based laptops, for instance, which run Android, have a keyboard and a mouse, and obviously the touch interface as well. So it's just about being careful, not making assumptions about it's either touch or the traditional events, but in an ideal case, doubling up events and listening to all types of inputs that the users might be sending to your application.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I think you gave us quite some impression on how to get touchy with our websites, and we say goodbye from the Webinale 2013.